What is up you guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to a long one. I haven't filmed this yet, but I already know it will be, so grab a beverage, I have coffee, and settle in because it's gonna be a while. What we're going to be talking about today is my career story because you asked and I shall provide. So without further ado, I don't have too many notes for this because I'm getting older, but I'm not that old that I don't remember what I've done and where I've been. So what I'm trying to hit is my general career timeline and what I've done in my previous roles, but also if I've been learning something or studying something by myself on top of or next to my full-time job, and if there's been any particular reasoning why I decided to leave a specific role and moved on to the next one, and sort of the reasoning on how my career has become what it has. And so without further ado, let's do this. Let's start from university because that's sort of where it starts. I did my bachelor's degree in international business, and during that period of time I did not know that I would be working in data. If you would have said that this is where I'll be in roughly 5.5 years, 6 years from graduation, I would have laughed you out of the room. No, I did not know this is what was going to happen. I did a couple internships during my bachelor's degree, one in communications for a startup company in the small city where I did my bachelor's. I did kind of an internship traineeship in a very small local business that was importing jewelry, and then that was sort of more like a sales assistant type. I was calling like major retailers trying to get the jewelry into the stores or seeing if they need any replenishment of their stock. And what else? I did work for a bookstore for about 10 months during my studies, and I gotta say, freaking dream job. Honestly, selling books and selling stationery, what's not to love? Even as an introvert, that honestly 10 out of 10, loved that job. But not where my career ends. After university, after I completed my degree, I came back from Montreal where I did my minor studies, and so I needed to figure out, you know, what I wanted to do before I would hopefully start my master's. So I had applied to a master's degree. What I really wanted to do, and like with a burning passion, was go into consulting, management consulting, the most generic type of business school graduate dreams. So what I was doing already in Montreal, I was applying for consulting internships or traineeships, but because I wasn't a master's student yet, and in Finland and I think probably in most of the Nordic countries we have this obsession with master's degrees, especially in the consulting industry, and they were basically telling me that I am not gonna get an internship before I'm at least a master's student. And fine enough, I then ended up kind of hanging around my mom's place for about 3 weeks. Looking back is not a long time, but at the time I was bored out of my mind. And so I was thinking, okay, if I'm not going to get into any of these consulting companies, some of them didn't answer me, some of them answered and gave me like one interview. One put me through the entire interview process, which I think was 4 interviews over 3 months, and then they didn't end up hiring a single intern outside of the company. I decided to apply for basically anything that sounded remotely interesting. What that ended up being was a position as a data specialist. It was a project, like a master data management project in an automobile retail company. They didn't have a lot of requirements. I think they required experience using Excel, experience using SAP was preferred but not mandatory. I think they kind of would have liked for you to have some kind of experience working with numbers, and honestly it was more like, if you want to learn, like, this is great. I ended up getting the job. It was super fast when I applied. They were basically, I think they called me on like a Thursday or Friday and they were like, can you start Monday? I was not even in the same city, so I ended up moving to my aunt's for a couple of months because the contract was initially I think 4 months, and then it got extended, and I didn't want to commit to a place before I knew that there was going to be an extension of the contract. So that was my first step into data, and that was January 2016, and I ended up being with that company for a year. So what I started doing was very basic data validation, like super, at this point I can say boring, but it taught me a lot. Validating customer data, checking customer records, understanding what's good quality data, where we might need to do better, then moving on to understand how we can use different dashboards and different data mining methods to find records that were not good quality and how to fix that. Then I moved on to understand and help design processes and training for the employees in the automobile retail company. So think people that were doing work that had to do with dealing with customers and inputting their information, but it wasn't their full-time job. Like that was just an annoying thing that they had to do. And so designing processes that would help them put the information in correctly without having to think about it too much and what the instructions would be, so that the data would be good quality from the beginning rather than us having to fix it. I also worked with bugs in the systems that would create poor quality data and that sort of thing. So I ended up working for them for a year. By the end of that year, I was sort of the main point of contact for customer master data. My manager was the point of contact for all of master data within the company. I would have loved to have a permanent position with the company because I was a contractor at that point, but they weren't willing to make me an internal. So at that point I was like, okay, that kind of sucks. But I had been contacted by a smaller consulting company that specializes in data management and cybersecurity, and they were willing to offer me a position, and they had a project in mind that I would be good for. So I ended up switching to them because I was like, okay, we've talked about making me internal and permanent for several months, but it's clearly not happening. And so I decided to move on and take the position in the consulting firm. And at the same time, I wanted to do consulting when I graduated, and I never got to do it. So now they were willing to make me a consultant, and well, turns out I don't really like consulting. I like having autonomy, and I like having responsibility, and I like having ownership over my work, and I like seeing long-term results. For me, consulting doesn't really provide that because you're in for a short period of time for a project. Most of the time, at least, you don't really have ownership over your work because you're working for a client. You also don't really have a lot of ownership or responsibility on projects that have to do with your consulting firm, because a lot of the times you're at a client 100% of your time, so you don't really feel like your own colleagues in your company are necessarily your colleagues, but at the same time your colleagues at your clients aren't really your colleagues, and it just, like, you kind of don't belong anywhere and you don't really own anything. And yeah, that didn't really sit well with me. I know that some people think that, yeah, okay, consulting is a really good way to learn and see a lot of different companies, and maybe you're right, maybe it is. But for me, when you're a young consultant and you are sold for your expertise and what you know, which is what consulting is, that's what companies are paying for, you're not sold for much. So the work is actually kind of crap, and the value that you're expected to actually get from consulting as a very young person or young professional is the experience or mentoring from more senior colleagues, which I don't know if it happens as much as you'd think it does. So consulting just wasn't for me, at least at that point in time. I was in consulting for, I want to say, 10 or 11 months. I finished the project that I was in, and at the time I started realizing, and this is where sort of my self-taught analyst, career starts, and this was in 2017. I started realizing that if I wanted to take my career in data, which I started realizing is actually a really good thing, because like this was my second job after my bachelor's degree and I had already been headhunted for it, I realized, you know what, if this is how it works, I want to become better, but how do I become better? Like, what is the skill that I need to learn to take this further? And I decided that, okay, that is going to be SQL. I saw my more senior colleagues using SQL. I heard people use it, and I was like, okay, I kind of saw people use it, and I was like, okay, I think I can learn this. So before I left consulting, I spent about 4 weeks in September just doing the SQL course that I keep recommending, which I'll link down below because it's excellent. I did that course. I think I spent about three and a half weeks on it, and I was really excited about it. And I was talking about, like, I know how to do this now and everything, and At the time I was still in university, so I had gotten into a master's program that autumn. So in September I started a master's program in strategy in the business school in Alta University. I got into a mentoring program through my university. So they had alumni that were more experienced that did mentor either graduating or soon to graduate master students. Well, I wasn't going to be graduating anytime soon, but I still applied and I got in. So and so my mentor was a director in a publishing company that had a business information department, and how I ended up getting my next job was actually talking with him about what I knew. And the irony was that he was very clear from the beginning that he understands that I have a full-time job and he wasn't worried, but he wanted to always say to all of his mentees that he's not an employment office, so or an employment agency, and so he's not doing mentoring to hire me. And I was like, you know what, like, it's fine, like, I have a full-time job, it's all good. And the time after we first met, we really got into a conversation about what I do, what I know, what my experience is like, and he basically said that there's a position in his department that just opened that would technically be perfect. So it was complete coincidence, serendipity, whatever you want to call it. But basically I had just learned SQL, and this was as a SQL database administrator, and I applied and ended up doing the interviews and aptitude tests and like what have you, and ended up getting the job. So it was roughly 6 weeks after that I finished the SQL course that I started a new job. And literally I think I got a raise of like 700 euros a month more just by learning that skill. And I was like, god damn, like if I can actually just keep doing this, keep learning this stuff and like figuring things out for myself, like what's next, like I can really get ahead in life and in my career. And for me that kind of opened that door, and I went into that job, and I was obviously very junior for what I was doing, which was I owned a database of business information for Finnish companies, and also sort of all of the customer deliverables from that, as well as kind of the business development side of it. So thinking about what kinds of data products we could develop out of that database. Yeah, I was very junior for it. I also got into a situation where 2 people had been let go from not exactly the same position, but sort of equivalent before me, and they had about, I think, 2 weeks to teach me everything about the customer deliverables and how the database worked, and their methods were very different to what I would have made. So they were managing all the database things in like Microsoft Access, which honestly I'll struggle to find a good use case for Microsoft Access, but I know some people like it. So after the 2 weeks I was expected to basically re-engineer the customer deliverable processes from Microsoft Access to something that's you know, in the 21st century. Oh man, re-engineering the processes while still having to deliver with basically not enough resources. It used to be a 2-person job, now it was a 2-person job, plus re-engineering the processes, plus trying to do some kind of new business development ideas and whatever for it. It was a mess. I started in November. By the end of December I was completely burnt out because I ended up working like 14-16-hour days trying to prove, obviously, that I'm worth the job and I was worth the chance. And when I say burnt out, I don't mean tired, I mean exhausted to a point where I'm like ugly crying in the bathroom at work because I'm so tired and I'm so just like out of my depth, and I knew that I could do it, but it was just that there was too much. And when you have the salespeople asking for their deliverables for their clients, when you're trying to deliver with the old methods that absolutely freaking suck and take forever, and trying to re-engineer them, which also takes time because you have to figure out how on earth the old processes work and everything, it was so overwhelming. It took me way too long to ask for help. And this is, if you take away something from this particular part of the story, if you are overwhelmed, if there's too much to do, if there's just like you don't have the resources, ask for help. Say that there's just too much to do with the resources that are currently available, which I should have done way earlier, but I didn't. I was absolutely just done. And I ended up talking to the new director of the department. So the old director, my mentor, left the company and we had a new director, and I asked if I could get an intern, a trainee, someone to help me out, because there wasn't any capacity, and I asked, and basically I think 2 weeks later we had found someone within the company in sort of an adjacent team who was very interested in learning more about working with data and doing analytics and doing data management and database management. And within 2 weeks, I was already training him. He also went through the same course that is below, because I literally swear by it. And he went through that course and I started training him. I think it was 4 weeks, 6 weeks that he was already helping me out, and it was so good. We eventually ended up hiring 2 more people to my team, and I'm like, if you can think about the fact that like something that I was doing with the help of another person ended up becoming a 5-person job, that probably says enough about like how much work there was to do. And so that was my role from end of 2017 until August 2018. So that was very interesting. It was also the time when GDPR came into the EU, so I worked a lot with data privacy and data protection and database management, data engineering, and analytics, obviously. It was a lot of things, and during the time that I was in that job, I think it was early 2018 that I started learning Python. I realized that a lot of the things that I was doing in ETL tools, so extract, transform, load tools, I could maybe do with Python, and it might be easier and more efficient. So I started learning in that in data camp. So I started the data camp track for data science, and I still love data camp. Data camp's amazing. I still have an ongoing subscription. If you haven't tried it, maybe you should. It's good. That helped me out in just understanding how much more there still was in data engineering and data science that I don't know and I can do in just other languages. May of 2018, I got a LinkedIn message from a recruiter in a big tech company with an office in Dublin. I was like, what kind of scam is this? Because that's kind of mean. And I didn't think it was real. I ended up messaging them back, but I remember I was sitting with my team and I was actually laughing out loud. I was like, oh my god, like, yeah, someone, like a recruiter from this company just messaged me, like, ha ha ha, like, how silly. I ended up responding, you know what, it's gonna be a good story if anything else. And I had an interview, I think, within a week from then. They were like, yeah, no, we'd like to invite you to do on-site interviews. And I was like, okay. That was my first time in Dublin. I think it took me like 2.5 weeks before I could actually go. That was June 2018, and I ended up coming to Dublin. I did my interviews on site. I did 3 interviews, and it was on a Friday. On the next Monday, the recruiter called me and informed me that they had an offer for me, and I was like, what? It was just unbelievable, because I never thought that I'd be able to get to these kinds of companies, because obviously you go to business school and they talk about like big tech and all these cool global companies as like case studies, but you don't really think that you're gonna like get to work in them, from Finland especially, because I didn't know anybody who really worked in these companies. So I got the offer, and obviously I really wanted to go. Ever since I came back from Montreal, I knew I really wanted to work abroad, so I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Okay, I'm gonna move to Ireland, which I never thought I would do. Not that I ever was like, I'm not going to move to Ireland. I just never thought about Ireland, I guess. I didn't really know how many tech companies there are here, and I took the offer. I started working here in August of 2018. The new role that I was taking on here in Ireland was an analyst role. I basically specialized in a geographical area, but also worked a lot on global operational data and understanding how we could be doing things better. I started also specializing in sort of internal systems around the first 6 to 8 months in my new role. From there, I actually started realizing that I really enjoyed analyzing systems, and I'd done a little bit of that in the past, especially in my first role out of college. Whenever we had things like bugs that were causing issues with data quality in the systems, I was actually analyzing where in the systems the bug was likely going to be. So I already had this kind of understanding of a system and how a process interacts with the system, and so where data goes goes in and where it comes out, sort of what the inputs and outputs are supposed to look like, and I was able to like very quickly pick up problems when I saw something in the data that didn't make sense. Because of that, I started specializing in internal systems, and that's kind of what my next steps after that would be. But to kind of put into context what I did as an analyst, I used a lot of SQL, I used dashboard tools, a little bit of Tableau, some internal tools. I'm not a huge like Tableau expert, mostly because a lot of my background is in data management, so I'm proficient in SQL and I can use Tableau. For me, the problem with Tableau is super powerful, and that's not the problem, but my problem is that like the Tableau aesthetic is not my favorite, so that's why, like, honestly, if a tool doesn't look the way that I want it to look, like a lot of the times I don't use it, and so that's my problem with Tableau. But it's very powerful. It takes absolutely nothing away from the fact that a lot of businesses use it, and it's very useful. It's just a personal preference, and I'm not gonna say anal, but a little bit particular about what I like in terms of aesthetics. But yeah, so that's what I was doing in my analyst role, and then I started working as kind of a subject matter expert on the internal tools. What ended up happening was that I think around a year into my analyst role, I also started leading a group of people that were subject matter experts on the internal systems within my department. And so I think there were probably 8 or 9 of my colleagues that were in that group. And so I was the main POC or point of contact for internal tools and internal systems within my department. And I started working very closely with systems project management, and so bridging the gap between my department and the development teams, because a lot of the communication was a little bit fragmented. That's kind of how I ended up in my project management team, and how I went from being an analyst to a project manager. So during that year and a half in my analyst role, my manager was doing a lot of coaching for me to go from sort of what I call execution work, so doing things yourself, doing your own analytics, doing operational work, basically just like doing everything yourself, to a more coordinating role. And that's kind of where my transition into leading that particular working group or subject matter expert group also relate to. That coaching was super valuable, and I'm so grateful, because I think in order for anyone to sort of progress in their career, they do need to at some point find their way out of that execution phase of just doing everything by yourself, to also being able to delegate and coordinate. I started working on a project, I think about a year into my analyst role, that when I moved into the project management team, I specifically moved to take over that project on that side of the team. So I was familiar with the project. I had been building that project with the team before I even joined, which explains a little bit about why I left that team so soon. Actually, I ended up being in the team for about 6 months before I moved to my current role, and it was nothing to do with the team as such. The project was in a phase where it was like the concept was built, the sort of foundation for an ongoing process in there was filled. For me, I kind of had been working in that same space for a while back then, and I was down for a new challenge. So I was contacted by another company. It was last summer sometime, it was summer 2020, and I was kind of like, I don't think so, like I'm pretty happy where I am. But then I started talking with them, and the role that they offered was a program management role. Well, I mean, it's my role currently. It was a program management role, and it just offered more opportunities to build things from scratch again, and to own a bigger area of responsibility. And yeah, I program manage an entire geographical region right now, and process development and product development related issues within that region. I was like, okay, let's do it. So from an analyst role, I've now moved to like project management and program management, which is sort of the area that I'm currently working in and have been for almost a year. The biggest difference is probably the type of work. So it's not so much executing on things yourself, it's coordinating resources and coordinating work across different things. I want to say from project management, program management, it's not the same thing. For project management, the goal is to deliver on a goal or a deliverable as efficiently as possible within the time frame. Usually, well, is talked about is like the triple constraints of project management, which is time, scope, and cost or budget. And so obviously usually you kind of mess around with those three and try and find a balance. That's much easier to, for example, outsource to a vendor if you need help in project management within an organization, whereas program management is coordinating activities and projects towards an organizational strategic goal, and for that it's a lot harder to sort of outsource it or put that responsibility on an external party because it's so integral to the organization. So that's kind of the difference, and so it's more about looking at the bigger picture of my role, like responsibility area, and what the strategic goals for that area are, and then prioritizing different projects and activities within that area in order to reach those goals. So it's a bit different. Similar skills apply, but the tasks are different. That's kind of my current area of responsibility. The coordination is definitely different than what I did as an analyst, but also I work a lot more with stakeholders, so a larger number of them. A lot more of my work is on influencing things. I know that I talk a lot about as an analyst you influence decisions, but it's still not necessarily influencing anyone to spend resources in a way that you want or in a way that aligns with your goals, which is more on the project management, program management side. It's a different set of skills that project and program management are developing for me, and that's kind of why I made that shift, and I talked a bit about that in my video of why I'm no longer a data analyst. And I love analytics as a field. It's great. I still do a lot of my analytics, and I use analytics as a tool for myself to build things like prioritization frameworks, which I've talked a little bit about on my Instagram side. It's kind of like you can take the girl out of analytics, but you can't take the analytics out of the girl. But yeah, I use the same skills, but in a way that's more in line with my current responsibilities, but I still work a lot with data. But yeah, that's kind of what I've done so far. During the time that I was doing project management, because I forgot to mention this, I did study software product management and sort of project management from a software product management perspective. I did a specialization on Coursera. I'll link that down below as well, but it's from University of Alberta. It's a 6-course specialization, and it was really good. I really liked it. It gives you a really good understanding of a software product development life cycle, how software product projects are managed, and what product management looks like for software. And it was really interesting. Would highly recommend it if you're interested in this particular area of work. I'm not one to really have like 5-year plans on where I want to be with my career, because if 5 years ago you would have said this is where I'm gonna be, I would have probably laughed you out of the room. So I don't know what's gonna happen, but at the same time I do know that data is probably going to be a strong part of my career in the future as well. And so yeah, my track has been very unplanned. I wouldn't say that I've ever really conceived of the next step that I want to have before I had it or had it presented to me, because I've been incredibly privileged to have been sought for roles. So obviously a lot of people apply for most of their jobs, but at the same time I've been very fortunate to be looked for as a skill set. So I have been headhunted several times. And that's kind of, I think, when you get experience in this industry, how finding jobs tends to go. Don't really have like a huge career plan on like exactly where I want to go. I know what kinds of things I want to work on rather than having like job titles in my head, and I think that's a really good thing. That's something that I would have wanted to know when I was coming out of university. I would have wanted someone to tell me, like, don't focus on the job titles, don't focus on a certain role that you want to have, focus on things that you really enjoy doing, focus on your strengths, and regardless of title, just look at in what types of roles you can utilize those to their maximum, basically where those things are the majority of the things that you do. Every job has shit parts. That's just the reality. No matter how passionate you are about your job, it will have parts that you're not a fan of. So I think the more important part is to find out where most of your job is you utilizing your strengths and enjoying what you do. That's kind of what my career story so far is. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and do subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.